Hey, welcome. Go ahead and grab your Bible. I have my Bible. Let's jump into today's episode. And just remember, life with Jesus is never boring. Instead, it's the best thing that can ever happen to you. So let's see how we can live on mission. Why do we call Good Friday good? Shouldn't we call it Bad Friday? This was the day Jesus Christ was betrayed, arrested, falsely accused, beaten, and crucified. Honestly, it feels like the darkest day in all of human history. So why is it good? Let's dive in. To understand this moment, you have to understand the story leading up to it. You have to go back to Passover, how it began and why it was celebrated. You have to walk through the garden. You have to see the betrayal, the interrogation, and the suffering. Only then can you understand why the worst moment in human history actually makes sense and how that moment became good. Let's start with Passover. First of all, what is it and why is it important? Passover is a Jewish holiday. Passover celebrates the moment when the Israelites were passed over by the angel of death because they did what God had told them to do. In order for the angel of death to pass over their homes and not take the lives of their firstborn, they had to sacrifice a lamb and shed its blood. Then they took the innocent lamb's blood and put it on their doorpost to show that this house belonged to God. This event caused the Pharaoh to finally let God's people go. You can read the full story in Exodus 12, 1-29, for it to all make sense. The event that happened later became known as Passover, and it took place around 1200 to 1450 BCE. That is about 1,300 to 1,500 years before Jesus celebrated it. It had been a holiday that he grew up celebrating, and the people before him and after him would also celebrate it. Every year, Jewish people gave thanks to God for saving them and leading them out of Egypt. I want to zoom in on a couple of details. According to Exodus 12, the Passover lamb had to be male. It could not have any spots or bruises. It had to be physically perfect. They even had specific instructions from God on how to prepare this lamb. The lamb had to be roasted, and it had to be eaten with bitter herbs. The bread that they had eaten had to be unleavened, which basically means no yeast could be added to make it rise and become soft and fluffy. Think of unleavened bread as the consistency of a cracker. So the lamb had to be male, it had to be perfect, and it had to be roasted slowly, and it had to be eaten with bitter herbs. Now let's look at Jesus. He was a male, he was perfect without sin, and he died a slow, painful death. Everything he went through was difficult and bitter. And we can't leave out the fact that Jesus died during Passover. To make it even more incredible, Jesus is referred to as the Lamb or the Lamb of God over 30 times in the New Testament. Jesus literally is the Lamb whose blood was spilled so humanity could be saved from sin. And his blood allowed us to be with God for eternity. Isn't that insane? See, this isn't just some coincidence. We don't have a God of coincidences. Our God is thoughtful, he's intentional, and we can't forget that. At the Passover, a lamb was sacrificed, and its blood covered the homes so death would not pass over them. And the amazing thing is, Jesus became that lamb for us. He was the fulfillment of the Mosaic law and the fulfillment of the prophecies spoken through the prophets. But the difference between the lambs in Exodus and Jesus is that Jesus' life paid for every single person who chooses to accept him. The lambs in Exodus covered people for a time, but Jesus' blood covers us for eternity. I love this quote by Billy Graham. It goes like this: God proved his love on the cross. When Christ hung and bled and died, it was God saying to the world, I love you. Jesus didn't have to take our sin on, yet he did. Jesus' death and resurrection repaired our relationship with God. Jesus was that blood on that doorpost. If we trust in him, we can have eternal life. Next, we have to go to the garden. See, I think the fascinating thing is, if we go back to the very beginning in Genesis, we see Adam and Eve disobey God, which caused every human being to have a sin nature, or the want to sin. And then, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, we see him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Matthew 26:39 shows us this. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Jesus knew that he would have to endure. He knew exactly what he would have to go through. He knew every single detail, yet he still stayed faithful to his mission. See, Jesus chose the Father's will over his own. Jesus knew the weight that he would have to go through and take on. He knew that it wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would be the most brutal crucifixion a person could go through. Yet he said, yes, take me. As John Piper said so well, Jesus didn't die as a victim. He died as a substitute. See, Jesus' death wasn't some fluke. What he went through was incredibly real. It wasn't some act. What he went through was real pain and real suffering. Jesus sweat blood. An interesting fact is that Jesus sweat blood because he was in extreme agony. Just imagine for a second that you are going through a punishment you do not deserve. You are about to take on every single sin of every single person who lived, who is living, and who will live. Every single nasty thought, every single word of hate, every single sin. Jesus took on your mess. Imagine you're carrying a big weight, a weight that you are not able to carry, but you're trying to. And then Jesus comes by, takes it from you, smiles, and keeps walking, carrying the rest of the world's sin and problems on his back. Your sin did not stop his love for you. In fact, it magnified it, but your sin still had to be paid for. I'm not sure if you've ever seen The Passion of the Christ. It's a very hard movie, but it does an incredible job of portraying Jesus' last few hours and the things that he went through. There's a line toward the beginning of the movie when Jesus is in the garden. Satan appears to him, which may or may not be accurate, but it shows the weight of the moment. Satan is whispering to him, trying to plant doubt, questioning if this was really going to be worth it, questioning if one man could really bear the burden of the world. The line goes like this. Satan looks at Jesus while he's crying out to the Lord and says, "Saving their souls is too costly." What a line. Saving their souls is too costly. But Jesus said no. He didn't bow down to Satan's evil schemes and his temptations. See, the fascinating thing is, Adam and Eve were tested and tricked by Satan in the garden. Yet Jesus was tested with this call and this mission, and he did not give it to someone else. He didn't avoid it. He looked death in the eyes and didn't shy down. Nothing Satan said or did could change the fact that Jesus went to the cross for you. May we never forget that. See, Jesus didn't shy away from his mission, so why do we? Next comes the betrayal. Jesus walked with his disciples every day for 3 years. They became very close to him. They did life with him. Yet the fascinating part of this story is no one is exempt from spiritual tests. Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' disciples who followed him, did miracles in his name, preached in his name, and spent 3 years with him. He fell into the trap of thinking he couldn't be tested. He fell into the trap many of us fall into every day. That us as Christians are good. We don't need to be worried about what the enemy will do or that the fact that the enemy won't come and try to deceive us. But we're very wrong. He will, and he does. But see, Satan did come, and he did plant lies in Judas's head. Is this really the Messiah? Look, he's just making a mess. Is he really going to save God's people? What if he fails? You should leave before it's too late. Jesus doesn't really love you. He loves the others more. These are maybe some of the lies Satan fed to Judas. And as time went on, Judas started to believe them and take them to heart. See, Judas thought that he was doing the right thing when he went to the high priest. Maybe there was a tiny voice in the back of his mind saying, "Don't do it." Yet he didn't listen. See, Judas's life wasn't taken over by the enemy's lies in just one night. No, it was little by little, lie by lie. John 13:2 says this, "The evening meal was in process, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus." See, Satan does this with us too. That's why we have to be on guard and in Scripture. So Judas went to the high priest. The high priest paid him 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver equated to about 4 months of work. So really, it was just kind of like pocket change. But see, it wasn't the money that Judas really wanted. Really, at the end of the day, Judas didn't fully trust Jesus. He didn't trust Jesus fully because he was too busy listening to the lies of Satan. We can get caught up in Judas's shoes. We can look at him and think what an evil man he was. But see, we can be just like Judas. See, how many times do we deny Jesus every day? When the Lord asks us to do something and we don't do it, we're denying the testimony of Jesus to somebody else. When we don't stand up for Jesus, we're saying that his sacrifice wasn't worth it. So when Judas led the soldiers to Jesus when he was at the garden, he greeted Jesus with a kiss. A kiss was reserved for a friend, yet Judas had given that friendship away for 30 pieces of silver. See, Jesus knew exactly what Judas would do, yet he still offered grace. He still cared about Judas. He still offered Judas an out, but Judas, he didn't take it. Was Judas an evil man? I really don't think so. I think he was a man that was caught up in the wrong assurance. His assurance wasn't really in Jesus. It was in Satan. See, Jesus demands for a response. Following Jesus has a cost. It's uncomfortable. Judas knew that, so he chose to take an easy yet deadly route. I do want to focus on one thing. Judas knew he had sinned. We know this because in Matthew 27:4, Judas says this, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." He said this after Jesus was taken in custody. I believe there was a spiritual battle going on inside of Judas's soul. Could he really be forgiven? Could he be saved? But Judas, he couldn't take it, so he took his life. Jesus offered Judas forgiveness, and Judas didn't think he deserved it, so he didn't take it. Judas was right. He didn't deserve Jesus' forgiveness. But the truth is, none of us do. None of us deserve his sacrifice, yet he still gives it. Judas decided not to take it. Next comes the interrogation. See, Jesus could have walked away at any point. He could have said, "God, you know what? This was a bad idea. I don't want to do this. Let's call the whole thing off." But Jesus, he didn't do that. Jesus was taken like a criminal. He was interrogated like a criminal. He was beaten like a criminal, and he was killed like a criminal. Jesus didn't get an easy way out just because he was the Son of God. The fascinating thing is, Jesus was lied about. He was falsely accused, yet he didn't say a word. People were literally paid to talk bad about him. People were paid to get him convicted. Isaiah 53:7 foretold of what would happen to Jesus, and it was fulfilled. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb he was led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that's before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. See, the high priest did not have the authority to crucify Jesus. Only Pontius Pilate had that authority. But see, Pontius, he didn't find anything wrong with Jesus. He could not find a fault in Jesus. I love in the movie Passion of the Christ when Pilate takes Jesus aside and Jesus is half beaten up and just doesn't look good. Pilate says, "Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and the power to release you?" Jesus responded and said this, "You have no power over me except the power that has been given to you from above." I love this line. So often we think that this story is in the hands of the people. We think that Jesus has no control. But at the end of the day, Jesus had full control. John 10:11 says this, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." And then in verse 18 he says, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down at my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up again." See, Jesus had full control and full authority the entire time. See, the fascinating thing is, Jesus walked into Jerusalem 6 days before, and everyone was cheering and praising him. But 6 days later, he left Jerusalem beaten and barely alive, having to carry his own cross, until finally someone named Simon of Cyrene was forced to help him carry the load. How fast people change. As Max Lucado said so well, on the eve of the cross, Jesus made his decision. He would rather go to hell for you than go to heaven without you. Next comes the crucifixion. As I have covered on this podcast before, crucifixion was one of the most brutal ways to die. Rome didn't come up with crucifixion, but they certainly mastered it. The crucifixion itself was horrific, but the guards went even further with Jesus. They beat him until he was unrecognizable. They whipped him with a cat of 9 tails, a whip designed to tear open the skin. He was lashed 39 times, pushed to the very brink of death, because 40 lashes was known to kill a man, so legally they could only whip him 39 times. After that, Jesus was dragged to another spot, and a crown of thorns was made, and it was forced into his already torn and bleeding head. Then they put a royal robe on him, not to honor him, but to mock him. They struck him down, spit on him, and humiliated him again and again. This wasn't just some easy execution. This was humiliation at its finest. It was cruelty shown by the guards, and it was a suffering no person should have gone through, especially an innocent man. But Jesus chose to endure it all for you. He took your place. I do want to make it clear, according to some research, Jesus was beaten worse than the other 2 convicted criminals. His process leading up to being crucified was much worse. Then Jesus was forced to carry his own cross. It was estimated that the portion of the cross that Jesus had to carry was 75 pounds to 125 pounds, maybe more. But just imagine carrying that on a bloody, torn-up back after being beaten for hours. Yet Jesus still did it. He fell 3 times on this less than half a mile walk, only 600 meters. It normally would have been a quick walk, but Jesus, it took him 2 hours. Just imagine the crowd that was spitting at him and taunting him as he walked on this grueling walk. See, I haven't even gotten into the tiny little details, because this could be an hour podcast if I did, but I want you to understand that this man was beaten unrecognizably. He was utterly humiliated, he was alone, and literally was going through the most brutal death imaginable. He didn't deserve any of it, yet he did it for you. Next, the cross. When Jesus finally made it to his destination with the help of Simon of Cyrene, who was forced to help, Jesus was shoved onto the cross that he had carried, and his left hand and right hand were nailed with nails. Not rope, but nails. Thin, giant tent pegs were driven into both of his hands, and one in his feet. Then he was hoisted up for all to see. See, the cross was a very, very, very slow death. Jesus went through humiliation, dehydration, and of course a massive amount of blood loss, and asphyxiation. According to Google, asphyxiation is the body's weight pulling down on the arms and chest, making it impossible to exhale. To breathe, the person had to push up with their nailed feet and pull up with their arms, causing massive strain, and of course, exhaustion. The cross was no joke, and to make it worse, Jesus literally had the entire world's sin on his back. What does that mean? Well, it means Jesus took on every single sin, every impure thought, every sinful action, every sinful word, everything. Everything that you have ever said, thought, or done that was sinful, Jesus took on. Now imagine taking on all of humanity's sin. The amount of sin Jesus had on his back could not be counted. See, instead of each person having to suffer the consequence for their sin, Jesus took it on. But see, we also have to remember that Jesus was perfect, and so is the Father. When Jesus took on sin, God could not be in the presence of sin. Not because he was weak, but because sin cannot be in his presence. So God turned his back on Jesus. As Habakkuk 1:13 says, "Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing." See, it's not that God is weak, it's that sin cannot be in the presence of him. And in the darkest moment, with all the weight of the world on him, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Every word that Jesus said sounded with the agony in his voice. Every syllable carried the full weight of separation, the pain he went through, and the burden of sin he chose to carry. This wasn't just any kind of death. This was the greatest example of humility and agape love. The love Jesus showed on the cross was incomprehensible. It was a picture of an innocent man taking on the punishment of the guilty. The cross showed God sending his son to step into our brokenness and redeem us. As Billy Graham said so well, God proved his love on the cross. When Christ hung, bled, and died, it was God saying to the world, I love you. And then Jesus died. His last words were, "It is finished." Not, "Okay, I'm dead," but in fact, it was, "It is finished." The redemption of the world had been paid for with Jesus' blood. If you want to read the full story, read Matthew 26 through 28. See, the best way I can help you understand the gravity of this is by helping you imagine something. Imagine the person you love the most in the world. Your mom, your dad, your sibling, girlfriend, boyfriend, best friend, etc. Now imagine you have done something wrong. Maybe you killed someone in a car wreck, or you stole. Whatever it is, imagine it. Now imagine you are sentenced to death, and that special someone walks in and says, I will take their place. I will die for them and cover their punishment, and you get to walk out free. But there's a catch. You have to watch your loved one go through the death that you deserve. The person you love the most going through the punishment that should have been yours. I know it's dark, but that's what Mary, Jesus' mother, went through. That's what all the disciples went through. See, life isn't cheap. God doesn't spill blood for fun. But I want you to understand that Jesus went through all of that for you. Being betrayed by his friend, being beaten until he was unrecognizable, and basically looked like a bloody piece of meat, carrying his own cross and dying the worst death a man could go through. Yeah, he did it for you. See, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the single most important event in all of human history. I can say that with 100% confidence. There's not another event that comes close, except maybe Jesus' birth. But still, the death and resurrection of Jesus is the most important event in all of human history, because it's the only event in history that has eternal power. Nothing comes close to God literally coming down and dying so that we could have life with him forever. So after going through Holy Thursday, through Good Friday, I hope you got a glimpse into why these couple of days are so important. So the question of the hour is, how can Good Friday be called good after everything that Jesus went through? Well, the reason Good Friday is good is because on the darkest day in all of human history, the greatest act of humility and love was put on full display for the whole world to talk about for the rest of human existence. Friday is good because Sunday is coming. Friday is good because Jesus didn't stay dead. In fact, he rises again, rebuilding the temple that he said would be torn down and rebuilt in 3 days. It's true. When Jesus said that, he was referring to himself. His body would be torn down, beaten, and killed, and then resurrected 3 days later. And that is why we have to go back to Passover, to how it began and why it was celebrated. We have to walk through the garden. We have to see the betrayal, the interrogation, and the suffering. Only when we walk through it all do we understand what Jesus endured and the depth of love that saved us. Jesus fulfilled his mission. His mission was to first bring the redemption about for all of humanity, if they choose him. But secondly, it was to point back to the saving grace that God extends to us. May we never forget the gravity of Good Friday, because without Good Friday, we cannot have the end of the story. Without Good Friday, we cannot have Resurrection Sunday. As Alistair Begg said so well, the cross shows us the seriousness of our sin, but it also shows us the immeasurable love of God. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. Go ahead and leave a comment on what you thought about the episode. And also, don't forget to hit follow and leave a 5-star review. You doing these things helps this show get out to more people, so that more people can hear about how Jesus can transform their lives.